welcome back to another episode of ACA Cast with your host this week, Alex Zito. ACA Cast is the official podcast of ACA International, the leading voice of the account receivable management industry. Before we start today, the content presented in today's episode is for general references only and should not be used as legal advice. I appreciate you taking your time to join us today. I have an exciting interview that I know you'll enjoy. In today's episode, we're exploring why consumer experience matters when collecting an account and how to maintain a positive consumer relation. Joining with me today is Anne Rosso May. She's the editor of Collector Magazine. Now here's the interview.
Today we're talking about communication strategies that ACA International members can use to help collection professionals have more productive conversations with consumers. Our guest is Mary Shores, CEO and President of Midstate Collection Solutions. Mary has spent over a decade teaching businesses and individuals how to create new ways of thinking. She trains her staff to use empathy and positivity in their conversations with consumers. Her book, Conscious Communications, a step-by-step guide to harnessing the power of your words to change your mind, your choices, and your life, was published last year. I'm Mary. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hello, Anne. It's so lovely to talk to you again. Thank you so much.
We've talked a few times in the past for Collector Magazine articles, and in previous conversations we've had, you have told me that one of your goals is that you want consumers to be happier at the end of a collection call than they were at the beginning. And I just love that mindset. So maybe we can kind of start at how to set the table for that. When consumers get a collection call, they often feel stressed and frustrated about their unpaid debt. What can collectors do to start the conversation out on a positive note?
Sure, and that's a great question. And I just want to set the tone of my whole mission about wanting consumers or wanting that call to finish happier than when it started. It's because, and it's great to understand this, that at our very core, we have a set of human fears. And one of those fears, actually the number one human fear, is poverty. And number two is health, and then there's old age, and there's a fear of death. And so you can sort of see the theme of these fears. And it's important for all of us to understand that when someone calls in, they're really already in that state of fear, and there's such a shame, unworthiness attached to debt. So there's this need to understand the feeling, the level of empowerment or disempowerment that these consumers are feeling. So when consumers first get a collection call, oftentimes they might not even be expecting to get that call in that moment. But just the fact that they're put into this situation where they're going to have this conversation that's triggering their fear, it's important to know how to handle that person to get them out of that fear state or out of that panic. One of the things that the collectors can do to start the conversation out on a positive note is honestly just having the training in place to understand where the consumer's at, to feel that sense of compassion that this person is in a state of panic. And that before we can come to a solution for the collection issue, we need to make sure they're with us. We need to make sure that consciously they can actually understand what we're talking about.
And are there words or phrases that can help collectors get there with a consumer?
Each consumer is going to be different because each consumer, is under a different set of circumstances. But I think that being really innovative and having a strategy, so let's just assume that we're already past all the validation stuff. The first thing is having compassion. So the words might be something like, I can completely understand how you feel about this. Those would be good words because we all have a set of human needs. When we're in a conversation with someone, we have a need to be heard. And it's like we have these boxes in our mind. And in order to be able to emotionally move on in the conversation, we need to check the box that says we've been heard. It's hard to say, would the collector start a conversation with this? Because we would need a whole lot of training just to even get to the point where I'm talking about right here. Because the start of the conversation is more about the validation and you owe this debt and waiting for them to respond. And then once they have responded, we need to validate whatever they have just said. I can completely understand that that's a very frustrating situation for you. Then the consumer checks the box that they've been heard. Now, that might not feel like a positive note, but it's so necessary for the consumer to be able to emotionally move on in the conversation. Because if we don't do that, what happens is the consumer is going to repeat the story over and over and over again because they do not feel heard. So the first way for a collector to start off a conversation on a positive note is to make sure that the consumer feels heard.
Now, I've heard you say that there's a difference between encouraging a consumer story and validating it. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a perfect next question to what I just said, because, if I were a collection agency owner, which I am, and I was listening to this, I would think, I don't want to encourage the consumer to feel like they're correct, or that, we're going down a track that's going to give them an excuse not to pay. And so I just want to point out that it's two very, very different things. We're not agreeing with them. We're not saying, yes, you're right, you shouldn't have to pay this debt because XYZ reason. We're not saying that at all. We're also not apologizing. We're simply giving a conscious acknowledgement that we have heard the words that they said. There's a lot of phrases that are being used nowadays. One of them is active listening and the art of practicing active listening. If we're listening and we give a response like, that must be really frustrating, or I can see why you would be concerned about that, or I'm so glad this is important to you, it clues the consumer in that they have been actively listened to, and again, they can mark that box to be able to emotionally move on. So the difference is we're not saying, yes, you're right. And actually, even though it might feel like we're encouraging their story, the truth is it's the thing that will stop the story. Does that make sense, Anne?
It does, yeah. I know that there are things that you can say to encourage or let the consumer know that they've been heard, but are there things that you recommend your collectors not say to consumers, or things that can shut down the conversation?
So one of the things that people oftentimes remember the most about me, or if they've had a conversation with me or they've seen me speak, is that I have this do not say list. And the do not say list is a list of words that we never say in the office. And the basic words are no, not, can't, won't, however, and unfortunately. It's really an interesting proposition for me to even ask the audience. Can you imagine your agents getting through their day without saying those words? We've been able to do it for over 10 years. The reason why it's so important is because my research has shown that each one of those words are trigger words. And when I say a trigger word, it's almost like it's a word that's inviting an argument. So if we say to someone, no, then now it's invited an argument. So that's why you have to get really innovative with how you create your scripts around avoiding those words. And again, it's not that I'm agreeing with the consumer, but I want to get through the conversation without triggering them in a way that's going to invite them to argue with me, because what oftentimes happens is it's like the consumer is in a boxing ring with the agent.
I imagine that if collectors haven't given this a lot of thought about really the impact that their words are having on the conversation, that a collection script would probably come in handy. Does your company use collection script, and how granular do you get when you expect your collectors to adhere to them? Do they have to say every word as scripted? Can they go off script?
I think that scripts create empowerment within your staff. Someone knows what to say. They know when to say it, and they know how to say it. Their confidence goes through the roof. They are now creating a conversation that is coming from a place of empowerment. Instead of the opposite of that is when they're just told to do a job, they really don't have many scripts, and they're left to their own devices of what to say, which means they don't know what to say, they don't know how to say it, and they don't know when to say it, which is a very disempowering situation. Another benefit of really utilizing innovative scripts is that it creates a level of consistency. So consistency is super important because you want all of your agents behaving in the same way. And so the way that we have gotten super innovative with our scripts is that the meat of the script, which would be the solution to the problem. We have already word for word things written out. We want the agent to say that to the consumer. But how they get there is up to them. We have a list of 30 different validation statements. Each agent just picks the one they like the best. The way you validate someone and feel natural about saying it might be different than how I choose to say it. Like some people like to say, I can certainly understand. And I actually don't like that one myself personally. I like to say, I really appreciate that you just shared that with me. So that feels more natural to me. So each person has some guidelines of how they're going to start off their scripts, but then the certain parts of it are 100% scripted. And then they've got parts where they can pick and choose how they want to put together their flow. And after they've practiced it for a few days, it really just gets super natural for them.
Are these scripts posted, or how do you publish them for collectors?
Depending on what kind of technology someone has, it's amazing to me that years ago, and I mean really years ago, like almost 3 decades ago, I was a telemarketer. And in a lot of ways, the software we had for telemarketing was really advanced compared to the software that we have in collections. So if someone's got software where they can embed into the scripts and it just pops up on the computer screen, that's really great. We don't have anything like that. So we just have things written out on cards, and everyone has an entire set of cards. It's almost like picture a deck of cards, but they're 5x7s. And then they have them categorized so they can just quick grab the one that they need. But because we go through an extensive training process, the truth is they already have the things memorized well in advance before they're going to need them.
I'm curious if you have any kind of example that you'd be willing to share with us about a collection situation that your collector was able to turn around using the scripts you provided and the more focus on positive words?
First of all, we have challenging situations that come up every single day. And just this week, we have a client that turned over multiple hundreds of accounts, and they're all messed up. I'm sure someone out there listening can relate to this. They had a temporary employee turning the accounts over for collections, and this employee was doing things like putting the account number in the balance field. I mean, it was a mess. So we basically had to catch all of these accounts. Some of the notices had gone out, but we still had phone calls coming in while we're trying to investigate and get all of the information correct in our system. And there was one particular gentleman that he was calling multiple times. He was really panicking, worried that the account was going to end up on his credit report before he had an opportunity to pay. Even though we were telling him each time he called, you know, these are under investigation, we're going to reach back out to you as soon as we can verify that your balance is correct. He was still panicking and he was still very, very nervous. So the last time he called in, we recognized that his last name started with the letter T. We were processing these on an alphabetical basis. So basically his account was going to be one of the last ones to get verified. Had my collector say to him, we appreciate so much that you're taking this level of concern. I can assure you that we're going to get this information for you as quickly as possible. The great news is that we're actually going to escalate the investigation of your account so we can get you an answer by the end of the day. We really let him know. We validated that he was taking this so seriously. We planted a positive seed by saying, you know what, I can assure you this is going to be okay. And then we provided him with exactly the information of what our next steps were. So sometimes when the consumer doesn't know what the next steps are, they'll stay in that panic. But as soon as we said to him, we're going to escalate, we're going to escalate your situation so we can get an answer to you as quickly as possible, we actually did follow up and provide him the answer, gave him a full 30 days to pay. So he then felt super confident that it was not going to go on his credit report. Now, I want to point out that in this situation, he was calling every day, and one of the reasons he was so easy to work with is because every day he called, he was being given consistent information. When you run into a problem, I'm sure sometime in your life, Anne, you've called customer service of some kind of business and been told multiple different things, and then you feel zero confidence in that company's ability to solve the problem. Even though he was calling every day, he was being told the same thing every day. We took it a step further by saying, let's just go ahead and escalate this for you. This is what we can do.
That sounds like a great approach. So he wound up happy and you got the situation resolved.
And he paid his account in full. But we have consumers thanking us so often for the way that we're treating them. We have consumers that write us letters and just tell us the difference that we made because of the way that we treated them with respect. Didn't make them feel any kind of shame for the fact that they owed that debt. Because having a debt is a psychological burden, and it's a burden that really gets in between people and living the life of their dreams. My research has shown that people are less likely to apply for a loan. They're less likely to start a business. They're less likely to even date the same person because they feel unworthy because they have a debt.
Well, Mary, if people want to know more, where can they find you online?
I have a website, maryshores.com, and if you've resonated with what we've talked about today, I would really appreciate you hopping on Amazon, check out the book Conscious Communications, maybe check it out. Also, we're going to have some webinars coming up through ACA, always available to speak at the state level or national level through any ACA organizations.
Well, this has been fantastic, Mary. Thank you so much for talking with us today.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Anne and Mary. We hope you enjoyed the discussion on communication with consumers. Make sure you visit our website at acainternational.org, where you can subscribe to ACA Cast or else in iTunes or wherever you download your podcasts so you'll never miss a show. We appreciate our ratings on iTunes, or simply just tell a coworker about the show. That would really help us out too. Well, thank you, and we'll see you next time on ACA Cast.